Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Andy Cahan, Director of Author Events, and I am excited to introduce our presenters. We have 912 pages, 31 books, and 1 hour to traverse the life and work of one of the most widely read and decorated authors of the 20th and 21st centuries. So I'm going to keep this brief. The cover of the New York Times Book Review on Sunday was dedicated to Cynthia Ozick's majestic consideration of Blake Bailey's biography of Philip Roth. According to Ozick, Bailey's comprehensive life of Roth, to tell it outright, is a narrative masterwork, both of wholeness and particularity, of crises wedded to character, of character erupting into insight, insight into desire, and desire into destiny. What remains on the page is one writer's life as if it was lived and almost as if it was felt. Tonight, Blake Bailey will be in conversation with one of my favorite writers and one of the best, Don Winslow, whose politically and economically astute and searing Cartel trilogy, among many other great reads, takes the best and the worst of humanity and transforms it into unputdownable fiction with style to burn. It's great to have you here with us tonight. Don, Blake, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Thanks for having us, man. And it's a pleasure to be back even virtually at the Philadelphia Library, a great venue. I had a great time when I was there, and you know how strongly I feel about libraries, and chatting with Blake, I think he has some things to say about that, and Philip Roth. So thanks for having us. And Blake, hello, man.
I am so thrilled to be here with Don Winslow, who is a terrific writer, a great guy, and a great American.
Hey, Blake. Okay, let's get right into it. So not here to hear about me. They're here to hear about you and to hear about Philip Roth. First, I'm going to start with you, though. Okay. I've read a number of your books. They're great books. And this is a great book. I'm just going to plug it for a second. A wonderful read. I'm a fan of literary biography. Blake, one thing that this reminded me of was Ellman's classic biography of James Joyce. By the way, it has that kind of depth and that kind of substance and style. So
wow,
congratulations.
Well, that's the gold standard.
On a terrific book. My first question to you, why literary biography? Not just for Roth.
It was a happy accident. Let's see, this would have been about 23 or 24 years ago. I had been trying to write fiction with considerably less success than you've enjoyed, Don. And I think I had finished my third or fourth unpublished novel. It was called Bourbon in the Bathtub. So
great title, Blake.
It was the title was easily the best thing about it. And you know, I mean, though I say it myself, it was stylishly written. It was kind of funny here and there, but it didn't say anything that a million other first novels haven't said and said better. But it did get me a good agent. And the agent said, you know, Blake, this fiction thing is not clicking for you. And said, the only success you've had, and that's been modest, has been with nonfiction. So here's what I want you to do. Write me a book proposal about whatever intensely interests you right now. And what interested me at that moment, which was 1999, was Richard Yates, the author of Revolutionary Road, sort of the great novel of post-war suburban discontent. Wrote Easter Parade, I think is a masterpiece. I think is an even greater novel than Revolution Road, 11 Kinds of Loneliness, and so on. And he was completely out of print. And I wanted to find out why. So I got in touch with his middle daughter, Monica, and she told me an incredible story. One, she was the model for Elaine in Seinfeld. She had dated Larry David during the 80s. There was an episode based on a terrifying encounter between Larry David and Richard Yates, The Jacket from the second season in 1990. He was the sole speechwriter for Bobby Kennedy at the height of the civil rights era. He was a pioneering patient for psychotropic drugs. He was bipolar, and so on and so on. It was a fascinating story. So I said, I got to do this. And though I had never remotely considered being a biographer, I wrote a proposal to write a biography of Richard Yates, got a contract, got 14 months to research and write it. And, I hit that street running. And I found out, as I say, a very happy accident, that this far and away is the kind of writing that I do best for whatever reason.
You do it so beautifully. I read your Yates book. I read your biography of Cheever, which I loved. And of course, I love this book. I'm going to quote you to yourself, which I know is very rude, but I'm interested
Not at all.
in your expanding on this. You said in an interview, "I didn't have enormous human expectations for writers of the first rank." Do you recall saying this, sir?
Yeah, I do.
Would you expand on that? I'm very interested in that.
Well, I mean, my biographical subjects have been troubled human beings, without exception, and very much including Philip, though he himself would deny that. Richard Yates was mentally ill. He was a colossal alcoholic, very difficult human being, very decent human being at bottom. John Cheever sort of speaks for himself.
Don Jackson.
And coming to Charlie, I mean, who kind of takes the cake, but Cheever, Cheever was kind of my quintessential subject because, a very compartmentalized personality. The face he showed the world was this, he talked like this, sort of like this in Howell III and Gilligan's Island. He fancied himself a Massachusetts Brahmin, and Cheever is a very old Brahmin name in Massachusetts. His father actually was a shoe salesman. He liked to play the role of this Westchester County paterfamilias. He had 3 nice children, and he was married to the same woman for 40 or 50 ghastly years. And of course, he was a closeted gay man. He liked keeping very raffish company. He hung out at these black bars near Sing Sing. So he was a really interesting guy. And I like solving that puzzle. I mean, how does this component of the personality relate to this seemingly diametrically opposite? And so on. Charlie Jackson, long story short, wrote The Lost Weekend, which is the first serious novel about an alcoholic in American literature. And it's been completely supplanted as a cultural artifact by the movie, which swept the Oscars. It got Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Director, etc. And finally, there's Philip. And Philip was sort of incredulous that I was even interested in him because, I mean, he's not an alcoholic. He's a nice Jewish boy. They don't drink. He was enormously successful. He was a millionaire many times over, arguably, both materially and artistically, the most successful literary career of the American post-war era. I mean, he made a lot of money, but when you balance all the money he made with his enormous prestige, I don't think Updike or Bellow or anyone comes close to it. So he was wondering why I was sniffing around, but what I found in Philip's life was very much sort of the same maladjustments as my other subjects. It's just a different kind of pathology. And I can elaborate on that, but it's up to you.
Yeah, I have a general question about writing a biography. I've done one in my life, by the way. And nobody read it. I didn't even read it. But what, philosophically, because you write about a lot of the people in this book are still living. Right. And it's probably true with the Cheever book as well, and the other books. What do you think? What's the balance here? What do you think as a biographer you owe, first of all, your subject? And how do you balance that with what you owe your readers? And how do you balance those with what you owe yourself?
Very near the end, Philip, I think, had about 6 months to live. It was our last formal sit-down interview in his apartment on the Upper West Side. And he was very crabby. He had just had a aortic valve replacement, and he felt very punk, and you know, and he was getting fretful about me and what I was up to. And by then, I'd been on the job for over 5 years, about 5.5 years. And he says, what do you make of me? What do you make of me? And he wanted to know what was I going to do to him, and this was Philip's great last concern. Okay. He didn't have family. He did not have a significant other. He was a very lonely man in his last years, and he was worried to death about his legacy. And that ball was in my court.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was heavy. And I said to Philip, I took my laptop out and I said, let me show you something. And by then I was beginning to very meticulously, I pride myself on that, organize my notes. And I said, I'm going to show you a few pages of my notes so you can see how I work. And I showed them to him. And I said, Philip, what I'm trying to convey is that I did not have any preconceived ideas about you going into this, which is true and which is always true of all my subjects. Or if I have them, I try to relinquish them. I said, I just gather as much evidence as humanly possible. I talk to everybody. I get every letter, et cetera, et cetera. And then the chips fall where they may. I finally have everything spread out before me. I can see what themes in a person's life deserves how much emphasis, the bad and the good, and I let it rip. It's like what Gerald Clark said about Capote. And by the way, Gerald Clark's portrayal of Capote puts my own liberties to shame. Like Capote hired goons to terrorize recalcitrant lovers and stuff like that. Gerald Clark said, I just assumed I could say whatever I wanted. And I said it. And I very much adhere to the same philosophy.
Yeah, it's all in here. I mean, the good, the bad, the ugly, it's all in this book. You had enormous, maybe unprecedented access to your subject in this book. Can you talk a little bit about that? Was it overwhelming?
Yeah, it really was kind of unprecedented. Arguably, I had more access than Boswell had to Dr. Johnson.
Yeah.
Because look, my predecessor was a man named Ross Miller. He was the nephew of the playwright Arthur Miller. And he was also Philip's best friend. And Philip's main concern when he first conceived of a biography of himself was to get back at Claire Bloom for leaving A Doll's House. Or as he would put it, to correct the record.
Claire Bloom wrote a memoir that was extremely critical of Philip Roth and portrayed him in a very negative light.
Right. Thank you, Don. Exactly. In 1996, Claire Bloom, who the famous actress, she had been involved with Philip for 20 years. For the last 5 nightmarish years of the 20, they were actually married, which just makes no sense at all. And she wrote a very damning memoir. Much of Philip's present reputation as an alleged misogynist is because of Claire Bloom's memoir. So Philip was obsessively upset about this episode in his life. And so he was going to essentially use Ross Miller to write his own biography by proxy, Yeah. And I can't go into it because it's a confidential agreement, but I saw the agreement he had with Ross. It was in a file in Andrew Wiley's office. And it was not
Andrew Wiley having been his
agent. And a very powerful and well-known literary agent. So I saw this agreement. I told Philip from the outset, I said, I'm going to make with you the same agreement that I've made with the estates of my 3 previous subjects. You were my first living subject, so I'm making it directly with you. And it's simple. you have to give me everything. You have to give me every pertinent document. You have to make yourself available for interviews. You have to encourage all your friends, lovers, enemies to cooperate with me, in exchange for which you get to vet the manuscript for factual accuracy, not for interpretive content, factual accuracy. Of course, he died before it was done. So his executors, Wiley and a former girlfriend named Julia Gollier, vetted the manuscript for factual accuracy. So that was the deal I made. And Philip, for the most part, was very honorable and thorough to a fault.
You mentioned earlier Updike and Bellow. Interesting, complicated relationships between
Very
Philip
complicated
Roth and those guys. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I found it fascinating in the book.
Yeah,
I'm a big Updike fan, by the way.
You know, I mean, people generally, I mean, if you weigh Updike against Philip Roth, you would think that Updike was a nicer guy. At least within the context of their relationship, Philip was the magnanimous one, and Updike was the not so magnanimous one. The trajectory of that was, look, Updike was a year and a day older than Philip, and they had very interesting correlations in their career. Updike's first novel was published, the Poorhouse Fare was published in 1959, and much acclaimed. Philip's first book, Goodbye Columbus, was published in 1959. Updike's first bestseller and first kind of semi-pornographic novel, Couples, was 1968, followed by Portnoy's Complaint in 1969, and so on. They had this sense of a rivalry. But Philip, whatever his faults otherwise, was not at all petty or rivalrous. I mean, if he read a book, whether he'd heard of you or not, if he read a book that he admired, he'd immediately sit down at his typewriter and write a fan letter and say, let's get together sometime. He did it with Louise Erdrich. He did it with Don DeLillo. He did it with a guy named Douglas Hobby, and so on. That was just the way he worked. With practically every book that Updike published, Roth was sincerely blown away. He was Updike's biggest fan. I mean, he thought, this man has the fluent prose style. He's just amazing. I wish I could be like him, because writing was a lot harder for Philip than it was for Updike. Updike ended up publishing in his lifetime, never mind posthumous volumes, 78 books.
Amazing.
And Philip only managed 31. So
only 31.
Only 31. So cutting to the chase, here's what happened. In the early years of the friendship, Updike would not review the books of his American peers, because he said, you know, friendship pulls one way and rivalry pulls another, and it's just not a good idea. Well, he got over that, and soon he was reviewing every one of Philip's books, prominently in the New Yorker, and he was becoming more and more impatient. And you can see this, you know, where he's kind of having to reach more and more to find nice things to say. What he was specifically becoming impatient with was this sort of solipsistic writing about a Roth-like alter ego, be it Nathan Zuckerman or Philip Roth in Operation Child. You know, he said, you know, it's time to sort of look out at the wider world. Finally, Philip wrote Operation Shylock. It's about Philip Roth, who finds out he has a doppelganger in Israel named Philip Roth.
Yeah.
Goes over there to stop him being, you know, impersonated, is commissioned by the Mossad to pursue a mission, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Updike tore him a new asshole in the New Yorker. I mean, it was an incredibly uncharitable review. And I'm almost done with Updike, but this is interesting. Even then, I mean, Claire Bloom says that Updike's review of Operation Shylock is what landed Philip at Silver Hill. You know, it pushed him over the edge. Yeah, a mental facility. Philip denies that. But Philip, he healed the breach. He went to Cambridge. He asked Updike to lunch. They worked it out. And Updike said, I'm never going to review you again. I just want to be friends. Okay. In 1999, Updike published a long essay in the New York Review of Books called On Literary Biography. Mm-hmm. And in it, he describes Claire Bloom as the wronged wife of Philip Roth, who proved to be neurasthenic, petty about money, et cetera, et cetera. Philip wrote back benignly to the New York Review saying, had he worded it this way, it would have been, less damaging to me. And Updike gave a perfunctory apology, and Philip, and then changed the wording in a subsequent edition of the essay to suit what Philip had said, but didn't own to, having kind of attacked him in the letter column. And Philip just said, fuck him. I never talked to him again after that. And then when Updike died in 2009, Philip gave this incredibly magnanimous quote to the New York Times.
Very much so.
Bellow, of course, is a great genius, and he was Philip's hero. But Bellow was kind of a nasty customer, and Philip always thought, that Bellow admired at least his early work, because he wrote this famous review of Goodbye Columbus for commentary, in which he essentially said, Philip Roth, who's 26 years old, has sprung from the head of Zeus. Most of us come into the world bawling and mewling and puking, not Philip Roth. He's all grown up. And what I found this letter in the uncatalogued papers of Dick Stern, their mutual friend, another writer at the University of Chicago, in which Bellow says, my review of Philip Roth's Goodbye Columbus was gutted by the editors of commentary. And so now there are two views out there of the book, mine and what Commentary magazine had made of it. So it was a much nastier review than it has come down in history to be known as. And, Philip was like a sort of frustrated courting lover vis-a-vis Bellow. Bellow kept him at arm's length, would say nasty things publicly on Dick Cavett, what has Roth got? To People magazine, he said Zuckerman was, a ridiculous performance. Who needs to write about writers? Who cares? The world is in flames. And so on. And finally, over the course of time, basically Bellow married his fifth wife, Janice, and Janice was a Roth fan, and she was finally able to sort of get the friendship off the ground. So
I want to give the audience a little teaser here and there from the book.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Could you tell us all a little bit about someone named Margaret Martinson Williams?
Margaret Martinson Williams. Maggie was Philip's first wife. She was 5 years older than he was. She was a hamburger joint waitress and secretary at the University of Chicago. She had two emotionally troubled, illiterate children from a former marriage. And Philip could not get rid of her, try as he may. Finally, one night he was living off the Bowery in Lower East Side of Manhattan, and he'd given Maggie a place to crash because she had been kicked out of her apartment. And he found the pawn ticket. She had pawned his typewriter. And he said, okay, that's it. Maggie, you've got to go. And she said, I can't, I'm pregnant. And Philip, who was unaware that they'd been having sex, except, like a few weeks ago, these middle of the night somnolent couplings, said, prove it, and gave her a jar to get a rabbit test. So she goes to Tompkins Square Park, finds an obviously pregnant woman, and pays her $2 or $3 to pee into the jar, and thus manages to prove that she is pregnant, and Philip marries her. And that marriage was something out of the grimmest plays of Eugene O'Neill. Truly horrible. Maggie would have taken at least half of Philip's profits from Portnoy's complaint, which made him a millionaire, but she died violently in a car accident just as he was finishing the novel.
And an amazing person, amazing character, one of so many in this book.
Well, yeah, and let me just say that
Yeah.
it was interesting in Maggie's case because I was sort of able to represent her inner life because I had her journal.
Well, that's my next question. It was amazing to me that you had possession of that. Can you talk a little bit
What
about
happened is that they were separated, and Maggie was trying to get the alimony raised again. I mean, she was just taking him to the cleaners. And at one point, she called Philip. This was 1964, so they'd been separated for about a year. And she had confessed by then to the urine fraud. And that's basically what broke up what made them separate. So one day she calls up Philip and she says, you know, if you want a divorce, then you're going to have to sit down and discuss it with me. And he says, no, you know, he says, just talk to the lawyers. Right. And she says, okay, you know, but I'm not going to give you a divorce unless you meet with me and talk it over. So he says, fine, come over. She comes to his apartment, sits down, settles herself and says, I'll never divorce you. I'll never divorce you. And she just keeps saying it over and over again. I'll never divorce you. Now, in the fictional version of that, In My Life as a Man, which is basically the novel about the horrors of his attachment with Maggie, the Roth character, Peter Tarnopol, takes a fireplace poker and starts beating her with it. And she fouls herself. And it's very violent. That did not happen. But he did try to drag her bodily out of the apartment. And an hour later, he got rid of her, and Shirley Fingerhood, his lawyer, called and said, she's filing assault charges. You need to get out of town. So he goes to the Jersey Shore to lay low, and she takes an overdose of pills. So Philip visits her in the hospital, and when she wakes up, he says, hi, Maggie, you're in hell. She says, oh, delicious, as long as you're here too. And she says, I need some things from my apartment, okay, and you need to go get them for me. So Philip, and I'm almost done, Philip is looking for evidence to present in court of this urine fraud, of being bamboozled in this incredibly sordid fashion. Mm-hmm. So he finds her journal, and there's a cop outside the door. I mean, because someone tried to commit suicide in the apartment, so it's taped off. And he said, I'm her husband. So there's a cop outside the door. You know, he sticks it under his jacket. And he also takes a long-handled can opener from her bedside table, which he said he turned over to the Library of Congress, which was used for a sordid purpose, according to Philip. Anyway, alas, the journal did not give explicit evidence. There's allusions to the urine fraud, but no explicit evidence. Those were among the thousands and thousands of pages that Philip turned over to me, was Maggie's journal.
It struck me, and see if you agree, that he was very kind to her children.
Okay, yeah, I mean, people make much of Philip's negative qualities, and particularly his raffish sexual behavior. The other side of the coin is a darling human being. And when he was a young man and found himself in this ghastly marriage to Maggie and inherited these kids who could not read or write or tell time.
That's literally true, by the way.
They were illiterate.
Not read or write. They were illiterate at what age?
11 and 9.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, so I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want
both of them. I interviewed both of them. They're
Right.
now in their 60s, and both of them say, Philip Roth saved our lives. Mm-hmm. Saved our lives. He was the first adult who was sweet and decent to us, unfailingly so. He protected us from our mother, who was crazy. he protected us from our father, who was crazy. He saw to it that we got tutors, that we were properly educated. I learned to read because of Philip Roth, said Helen, as I call her in my book, and so on. And I end the book in my epilogue going back to them as adults, as in Helen's case, not in the person I call Ronald, but in Helen's case, a very well-adjusted, happy, prosperous adult. And she says, I owe Philip to that. And she kept a picture of Philip on her dresser her entire life, and was heartbroken when he died.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I believe in sort of the pantheon of modern American writers, but let's say that such a thing exists.
Sure.
Where is Philip Roth in that?
He's high. The first time I met Philip, he always kept the top hat that Bellow wore in Stockholm when he got the Nobel Prize. Philip inherited that, and he kept it on a speaker in his apartment on the Upper West Side. And he asked me to try it on, whereupon I learned that Bellow's head was much smaller than mine. And I said, can you wear this? And he said, no, I can't wear Bellow's hat. He's a much better writer than I am. And he said that many times. He regarded Bellow as a superior writer. I don't agree. A good way to put it in a nutshell is in 2006, the New York Times canvassed 200 literary critics, scholars, writers to name the best American novel of the last 25 years, from 1981 to 2006. Of the final list of 22 novels, 6 were by one man, Philip Roth. Bear in mind, those 25 years from 1981 to 2006 are less than half of Philip's 55-year career. And Goodbye Columbus was 1959. That made him the youngest ever winner of the National Book Award. Portnoy's Complaint was 1969. That's on the Modern Library list of the 100 greatest English language novels of the 20th century. And there were many novels after 2006. So it's an astonishing career. And I think that speaks for itself.
You worked on this book, you said, what, 5.5, 6 years?
Oh, no, longer than that.
Or longer than that. But
I started in May 2012. And really, I mean, I still had things to do right up to publication. So almost 9 years.
Wow. How did it feel when you were finished? How did you feel?
There was never, Don, it didn't feel finished until Cynthia Ozick's review appeared yesterday on the front page of the New York Times Book Review.
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But did you feel, I've written a few long books.
Yeah.
And after they're done, I've felt this simultaneously, this relief and this sort of emptiness. And I'm curious, with you having spent so much time on this man, this character, these wonderful books that he wrote, what was that like when you typed the end of it?
I felt and I feel both a profound elation and a profound emptiness, because it's all downhill for me from here. I'm not like you, Don. I can't keep churning out the, because if you're a literary biographer, I mean, I've written a memoir and it's a good memoir, but I'm principally a biographer and a literary biographer, and there's no good place to go after Philip Roth. I mean, Philip is the summit.
That's my next. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead, please.
No, not at all. Go ahead.
No, because that was my next question, and it's an ugly, unfair question that I hate when people ask me, and that's why maybe I'm.
What
asking.
next?
Yeah.
Don, it's a perfectly fair question.
I mean, take a week off, Blake. Please take a week or two off. I think that's fair. But then after that, when we want you back,
right? There's bills to pay.
Yeah.
Shane, help me. I will admit that, as Shane knows,
Shane being, by the way,
our agent,
Blake,
Shane
literary
Salerno, a
much
wonderful
beloved by
man,
both
a
of us.
sweet-souled human
Sweet
being,
soul.
as our publishers will attest. I have written a short memoir of my collaboration with Philip, like 150 pages,
That'd be fascinating.
and I just this biography has turned out to be so controversial, and there's the people saying we need to cancel this guy, he's a misogynist, he's this, he's that. That this memoir, if I publish it, it won't be anytime soon. I'm going to let considerable smoke clear before I do that. I think maybe we should take some questions.
All right.
We have about 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, I got a message from our host saying I could go a little bit longer.
Oh, okay.
So that's why I did. So
Sure. And you were going.
But I am going to go to the questions because they are stacking up here on the
right.
I just was going to take one more stab at finding out who you were going to tackle next, but
I'm collecting fluff on somebody, Don, but I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Okay. I gave it my best shot, everybody.
You gave it your best shot.
And now I'm going to turn it over because other people want to talk to you. Okay. Let's see if I can move this window so I can read questions and look at you at the same time. Cool. Here's an interesting question. What would Philip Roth have had to say about the fact that he died on the 80th birthday of actor Richard Benjamin, who starred in the movie version of Goodbye Columbus and Portnoy's Complaint?
That's an excellent question. He would have regretted deeply that Richard Benjamin had not predeceased him, because he wanted all his enemies dead by the time he died, and he was not a Dick Benjamin fan. Richard Benjamin, played Neil Klugman in Goodbye Columbus opposite Ollie McGraw, and also played Portnoy in the just unspeakably awful production of Portnoy's Complaint, which, of all the arduous research I did, all the trips to the Library of Congress, all the plowing through the thousands of pages of papers, I could not sit through the movie version of Portnoy's Complaint. It's that bad. Anyway, Philip thought that Philip's main desideratum for any actor who played one of his alter egos, i.e. was effectively playing Philip Roth, was that they be forceful. He always said, they're not forceful enough. They're not forceful enough. And he thought, why? They cast this nebbishy, smirking, guy like Richard Benjamin twice, in my movies. So he would not have exulted in sharing a death date with Richard Benjamin.
Okay, here's an interesting question. Which writers are Roth's legitimate heirs, and which writers now are writing like him? And she says, thanks.
An excellent question again. These are great. Philip, as an apprentice writer, his short fiction was very derivative of Truman Capote, believe it or not. Philip said that his young self made Capote look like a longshoreman. So these are very sensitive stories. Capote and J.D. Salinger were sort of his early main influences, a little bit of Thomas Wolfe's grandiosity and lyricism occasionally thrown in there too. What helped him achieve maturity was Bellow and Malamud. Malamud sort of taught Philip that he could write about very prosaic things that were part of the American Jewish ethos, like a storekeeper, a rabbi in a shabby shul in Weequahic, and so on. Bellow's influence on Philip was mainly one of diction and a sort of proud formlessness. Augie March was the most seminal book in terms of influencing Philip. Showed him that he did not have to stick to, as University of Chicago would have it, ideas of neo-Aristotelian architecture in one's narrative structures and so on, that you could be freewheeling and picaresque, and you could have this sort of ranting prose and so on. That was very important to Philip. And, you know, his legacy, Philip's own legacy, who he influenced, is a little problematic. Jonathan Lethem, you know, because Philip's career was over 55 years, was one of such incredible versatility. To compare books from one era of his career with another is apples and oranges. You know, he started out as this sort of lighthearted satirist in Goodbye Columbus, and he ended up writing these epic tragedies in the American trilogy. And One's Hard Pressed, he was the funniest. Portnoy's Complaint is the filthiest and funniest book in American literature. And he went on to be completely devoid of humor, you know, and especially in these last books, which are meditations on human mortality and fate. So Jonathan Lethem, I quote toward the end of my book, Jonathan Lethem is a disciple and will freely admit it, you know, but he says, you know, it's impossible to, you set your, you know, he's got an army of counter Roths because he's part of the maximalists, the putters in, he's part of the minimalists, the takers out. He's a tragedian, he's a farceur, you know, and so on and so forth. So how do you relate yourself to Philip Roth? Choose a Philip Roth.
Well, there's so many great questions here, Blake, that I wish we had 3 or 4 hours for this. I would love it. A lot of people are asking, and I know that you've been asked this before, but it's a very good and sensible question. What's your favorite Philip Roth book?
My favorite Philip Roth book is The Ghostwriter. The Ghostwriter was published in 1979, and it was the first volume of the Zuckerman trilogy. And Nathan Zuckerman is a young writer. He's written sort of his first really good story, but it's offended his father, who finds it anti-Semitic, just like Philip, as a young man, offended the Jewish establishment grievously. He was denounced all over the world from rabbinical pulpits. His father tells him this story is a story about kikes. This is a story about kikes and their love of money, and tries to persuade him to disown the story and disown this trend in his writing. So Zuckerman goes looking for another father figure, and he goes to E.I. Lonoff, who is loosely based on Bernard Malamud and is this very reclusive, uber-disciplined Jewish writer. And so he visits him in his Vermont farmhouse, and there's a mysterious young woman there, Amy Billette. And Zuckerman has this fantasy that Amy Billette is really Anne Frank, okay? And Anne Frank has survived the Holocaust, and Anne Frank's real father, Pym, did survive the Holocaust, you know, and she wants to be reunited with her father, but she can't, because she can't come back to life, because she is the embodied spirit of 6 million slaughtered Jews. She's a saint. She has to go on being dead. So Zuckerman wants to take Amy Billette / Anne Frank home to his parents and say, I'm marrying Anne Frank. Because how can he be a self-hating Jew if he's marrying this saint of the Holocaust? Finally, the next morning, Amy Billette's coat sleeve falls down and there's no concentration camp tattoo. And he says, the person who had to disown a beloved father was not her, it was me. And, you know, I mean, it's a gorgeous book, beautifully wrought, and perhaps the greatest book that I've read about the unexpected consequences of the writing vocation. I also like American Pastoral.
Yeah, me too. I'm trying to get to so many of these questions. They're all great. So Andrew says, a wonderful discussion about a great book. I agree on both counts, by the way. To parse out his question, though, Roth rejected the notion that he was the or a great, quote, Jewish, close quote, writer. Can you explain what Roth thought and felt about his Jewish identity and its impact on his work?
Yeah, Philip constantly asserted that, I am not a Jewish American writer. I am an American writer who happens to be a Jew. And he said, Hemingway and Faulkner and Fitzgerald and so on didn't go around saying they're Christian American writers. So why should he be ghettoized that way? Bearing in mind, of course, that Philip wrote obsessively about Jews and their American predicaments, you would think he would proudly claim the role of a Jewish American writer, but that was not the case. People have a misconception about Philip that there was some sort of merit to the accusation that he was a self-hating Jew, because there are a lot of unsympathetic Jews in his fiction. All I would say about that is that there's a lot of unsympathetic women in Philip's fiction. There's a lot of unsympathetic Black Americans in Philip's fiction. And there's a lot of sympathetic women and a lot of sympathetic Jews and a lot of, as he said, Hamlet does not stand for all Danes, Raskolnikov does not stand for all Russians, and so on. Philip's main aesthetic mantra was let the repellent in, show people as they are, show the human stain. And he certainly didn't go easy on himself in his alter egos. Anyway, the point is, Philip loved being a Jew. He loved living among Jews. He lived on the Upper West Side because there were a lot of Jews. He liked the joking, he liked the volubility, etc. But he didn't have a religious bone in his body, and he certainly did not want to be judged through a Jewish moral lens, which is why he was happy that a Gentile was writing his biography.
Stephen Mearns, I'm probably butchering his name, says this: I've heard that there are 4 rules to a successful biography: that it makes you wish to have known the subject, that the book elevates the important elements of the subject's life, the biographer puts the subject in context within their field with their regard to their importance and influence, the private person really appears and not just reminiscences from others. You've hit all 4 nails on the head perfectly.
Thank you, Steve.
By the way. Congratulations, loving the book. He asked this question: was this a conscious effort or just how you work?
That is so nice, so generous.
And so accurate.
Yeah, I was waiting to see if he was going to, put me back on my heels with that, like, and how could you claim to have fulfilled these diverse criteria? But no, he was saying I did, so thank you. And I have, gotten some very generous remarks from people who are very close to Philip, including Mary Carr, who's going to be in conversation with me in a couple of days. She said I conjured him in holographic detail, so that's great. Again, I find that if without regard to any sort of preconceptions, aesthetic, intellectual, and certainly moral, if you go about it empirically, and if you have the sort of negative capability to inhabit the imagination of your subject based on the evidence, and tell equally the bad and the good, that it comes out in the wash, and the person's humanity tends to come through. In Philip's case, again, so much has been made about his alleged misogyny and his his alleged anti-Semitism and his alleged viciousness toward Claire Bloom and so on, that they forget his wonderful qualities. I mean, if you were a friend of Philip Roth and you got sick, Philip would visit you every day in the hospital. He would offer to cover your medical bills. He would call your friends and see if they could chip something in too. He did this repeatedly. He did it with Veronica Gang. He did it with Janet Hobhouse. He did it with Aaron Asher. I mean, that was just the kind of person he was. And, again, when Philip lay dying, he was visited by 6 or 7 or 8 of his former lovers, one who was 86 years old and needed a helper to get there. And I saw that. I was there. If you can get 6 or 7 or 8 of your former girlfriends to kiss you goodbye when you're dying, then you must be doing something right.
Let's back up for a second. And you were present when he was dying.
Yes, I was. I can accurately say that the only person I've watched in extremis is Philip Roth.
Wow.
I arrived at the cardiac ICU at New York Presbyterian when he had already been terminally sedated. So he was taking these horrible last rasping breaths. But there, Philip had no immediate family. He had no significant other. So usually when you're in the cardiac ICU and you've been terminally sedated, only your immediate family can visit you. But everyone was there. And the nurses loved Philip, so they let us come and go as we pleased. So people were milling in and out of his room and kissing him, and it was very touching, and it was a very good experience for me, in a way that's kind of hard to convey without seeming a little maudlin. But it was a good experience to me because I was heartbroken, and it was good to know that, because as a biographer, it was to my advantage that Philip was leaving the scene, but I was very humanly attached to him. But also, it made dying, this person that I had come to know so intimately, to see him dying, it just seemed natural. Again, that sounds kind of banal, but that nothing has so effectively impressed that on me.
I'm going to give you a short question to let you catch your breath a little bit. Where does Blake Bailey live?
Blake Bailey lives in Portsmouth, Virginia, near the so-called Elizabeth River, which is not a river at all, but rather an arm of the Chesapeake Bay.
Someone's asking also, are his letters and papers, I've lost the actual question here, there's so many, but I think it's an important question. Are they going to be archived anywhere? Do you know?
Okay, a lot of Philip's, all of Philip's manuscripts, draft after draft after draft, and a lot of the letters, mostly the letters written to him, are in his archive at the Library of Congress. Philip gave me thousands of original papers, including memos telling me what to think about various episodes in his life. And those are still in my possession, because I have 18 months to relinquish those to his executors, who will then decide what to destroy and what to pass along to the Library of Congress. And that's entirely their judgment to make. I have nothing to do with that.
Tom Smith asked, Blake, did your opinion of Roth as a person or writer change materially during the course of writing the biography?
A lot of questions often asked is, did you end up hating your subject? Because some famous examples of biographers that have become Mark Schreyer, I've never been able to pronounce that, but was famously the biographer of Sinclair Lewis, and clearly despised Lewis by the time he finished his biography. Jim Atlas was thoroughly fed up with Saul Bellow by the time he finished that. Carlos Baker was sick and tired of Hemingway, and so on. And that really comes through in their books. I don't claim to be more virtuous or forbearing than those biographers, but I have never remotely hated my subjects. Indeed, I have always felt a warm affinity, and particularly with Philip. And partly that's that, I take a pretty dim view of myself as a human being, so it's really not my place to cast aspersions.
Elizabeth asked, could you talk more on Roth's loneliness? Was that essential for his writing? He clearly had lasting friendships.
He had many lasting friendships, but I think, Philip, because he couldn't bear any distractions from his vocation, he never willingly got married. He was tricked and kind of cornered into marriage twice, and both were disastrous. But he never had children. He never even had cats, and he liked cats. Common misconception. Francine Duplessis Gray, one of his arch enemies, said, he hates all children. He hates all animals. quote unquote. It's on tape. But he loved cats, but cats were too adorable. They were a distraction from his writing. So Philip, toward the end, he was very sick. He had a terrible back. He could barely, ambulate to the bathroom. He had, terrible heart problems. He was in and out of the hospital, and he had to rely on friends, to check him out of the hospital and to take him there. And he hated that. So in the last 10 years of his life, I think the great regret of Philip's life was that he did not have a daughter who doted on him, and someone who was, for whom he would be an ultimate concern. I think Philip really felt the lack of that, and he was very lonely in his last years.
Here's an interesting question. Well, they've all been interesting questions. Did Roth ever say what book of his he would most like to be remembered by?
I can tell you the one that was his favorite. I mean,
sure,
hands down, it was Sabbath Theater.
Sabbath Theater. Why? I didn't mean that the way it came out. Sorry.
One, because he had so much fun writing it. He'd finally gotten rid of Claire Bloom, and he just felt marvelous. And he felt this profound misanthropy, and he just let it rip. Mickey Sabbath is sort of the most loathsomely hedonistic individual in American literature, and incidentally, the most autobiographical character I ever created, as Philip gladly admitted. So he's impious, and he's libidinous, and he's just shameless. He's Portnoy, but without Portnoy's nice Jewish boy guilt. And if what Philip wanted to accomplish above all was to let the human repellent in, he never accomplished it so exuberantly as he did in Sabbath Theater.
Let me ask you a related question from Joan Lewis. Is the character Libby in Letting Go based on a woman that Philip Roth was emotionally involved with in his 20s?
Libby Hertz is, Philip denied this for what it's worth. I didn't buy it. He had a girlfriend at the University of Chicago who looks exactly like Libby Hertz and was kind of skittish and endearing in her shyness and insecurity like Libby Hertz. Her name was Pat McInerney. And in my book, I describe her as looking like a pretty olive oil, from Popeye. Or like the interpretive dancer in Jules Pfeiffer's cartoons. Anyway, that was Libby Hertz, Pat McInerney, and a little bit of Ted Solotaroff's first wife, Lynn, for what it's worth. That's my own formulation. Philip would not agree to that.
We're running out of time. Blake, I'm going to just ask you two more questions. Okay. So you know what's coming up. And
now I have to go to dinner.
Okay, I'll let you go.
No, ask those questions.
What author or authors did Roth like that he felt did not get their deserved notoriety or exposure?
The paramount example was his lifelong friend, Richard Stern. Richard Stern was a friend going back to their youth at the University of Chicago. Stern was prolific. Stern was ingeniously experimental, but also wrote very conventional and craftsmanly fiction, like his best known book, Other Men's Daughters, which Philip thought was the masterpiece of the 1970s in terms of sort of capturing the 70s ethos, like Gatsby captured the 20s American ethos. And Stern just could never get a break. He could never get a frigging break. Philip, with his usual generosity, was constantly, commissioning Bellow and Malamud to sponsor Stern for membership in the American Academy of Arts and Letters. They could never get him in. And the public just didn't know Stern at all. He scarcely existed in the public eye. So, when Philip discovered a writer that he thought deserved greater exposure, he would do anything to sell that writer to the public. Louise Erdrich, Philip discovered her, and that's a happy example, obviously, of someone that he successfully sold to American readers.
Final question, and I apologize to those people whose questions we didn't get to. They were all great.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't get to them either.
Yeah, it's been a fun session.
It has been.
I'm going to shorten this question from Tim Horvath. He's wondering about Roth's impact on your voice and style. Did it change your writing of this book while you were writing?
You know, I find myself when I'm talking about Philip in interviews or to friends, I always am sort of, I have this sort of simmering titter in the back of my throat. Philip's a very fond memory for me. And we were very en rapport in terms of our senses of humor. And he could make me laugh at the drop of a hat, and kind of vice versa. So we got along very well. I mean, again, I had to remind Philip from time to time, maybe you don't want to tell me all this, you know, because I am your biographer. I'm not, you know, this can't really be a friendship. This is a professional relationship, but we were quite close. And, you know, it's a question of sensibility. I think that my writing, such as it is, had been pretty well formed before I came to Philip. And so, no, I don't think he had an immediate effect on my prose style.
Hey, Blake, thank you so much for your time. This has been, for me, just a fun session.
Don, you're the best. I can't tell you what an improvement this is over my last session. This has been wonderful, and I'm honored, and I've had a great time and great questions from everybody. So thank you.
This is the book. It's not only physically a beautiful book, it's a beautiful book inside and out. I highly recommend it to everybody. If you haven't read it, go out, get it, make it your weekend. This is really a wonderful book. And Blake, thank you so much for writing it, man.
Thank you so much, Don, for doing this. I'm so honored, and it's been so much fun. Thanks a million.
Good night, everybody. Good night, Philadelphia.
Good night.
Good night, the library. Good night, whoever looking in. He's going to dinner. I'm going to go cook dinner, and we'll see you all, I hope, in person sometime soon.
Okay, bye, Don. Thank you.